Well, good afternoon. It is April 29th, 2024. Good afternoon. How are we? Welcome to Scouching Live. I, of course, am your host, Will Scouch. I am flying solo today. Our illustrious co-host, Sam McGilligan, of course, has a real job, and unfortunately, during playoff season, that prohibits him from showing up. And we don't want to do shows at night during the playoff season. So we're doing some afternoon shows, of course. So we're happy to have you. On that note, we're also not brought here by our producer AJ Jadaro, who is currently having significant technical difficulties at his home and currently has no access to the internet. So we're doing a flying solo show today. We are doing a Q&A episode, of course, but before we do, obviously I have to go through our lovely sponsors of the show. But before I do, I also have to reorganize myself here and get reoriented. But in any case, all right, we're all set up. We'll get through the boring stuff before more people show up. But in any case, we're brought to you by Fanatics. You can use our affiliate link below, or you can scan the QR code in the window. It's over on the far side over there. Man, everything's backwards. Far side over there, where you can provide a small kickback to the show on anything you buy in the store. We're also brought to you by puckprepshockey.com. I have been hard at work over there covering the under-18s. And on that note, I honestly have fallen off a little bit watching the Stanley Cup playoffs. I mean, I can't, do a billion things all at once, but been watching as much as I can, and we'll have more on that in a few moments. We're also brought to you by Fractal Hockey Consulting, which is my business for hand-track, targeted player analysis, and recruitment packages for the NCAA Europe and beyond, with solutions for any of your organization's needs. And of course, Scouching.ca, which is obviously what fuels this show. And you can go to Scouching.ca and subscribe for exclusive access to data tools with a ton of insight into the draft prospects for this year and beyond, as well as players making their way into the NHL. We have a number of reports that are out. A couple are public right now, but any subscriber level has access to the next two. So there's going to be a couple more coming out over the course of this week. We filmed a few more, so there's going to be a bit of a backlog, so it's going to be solid. We've gone through, if you haven't seen it, we've gone through Nikita Artemonov and Michael Bronseg Newgard, as well as our Anton Salayev, that's the kid's name, I forgot there for a moment. And then we've got Konsta on the way, we've got Andrew Basha on the way, we've got Ivan Demidov on the way, so there's going to be a lot of fun ones coming up relatively soon. So let's start by giving credit where credit is due to the Kazakh under-18 national hockey team for their first win ever at the under-18 World Championships. So they pulled off a wonderful victory today over the Czechs in overtime. So good for them. I obviously have plenty of thoughts on what how the under-18 has gone so far. I've seen most of the games, not all of them, but most of them. In some way, shape, or form. So we'll get to that in a moment. But yeah, big shout out to the Kazakh national team. If you weren't aware, the Kazakh national team has not been in this tournament since 2003, I believe. And in that tournament, they lost every game they played. It was not a great time for them. But before that, I believe in the 90s, they played in a tournament that involved a lot of former Soviet states playing against each other at the junior level, where they, won some games there. But regardless, now at the big boy tournament, it's the first time they've ever won a game, and not a moment too soon, because looking at my handy dandy table, it is entirely possible, maybe not likely, but it is possible that the Kazakh team gets through the quarterfinals. It is not likely, but it is possible also that they get through the relegation round and stay up. I mean, I don't think they will, based on what I've seen of them. But judging by what I've seen out of teams like Slovakia, today Latvia lost to Norway. So whoever ends up in the relegation round, I have no clue who it's going to be. It seems like Slovakia is the team that seems to be struggling the most. But, Norway is a team that they might be able to beat. Just looking up and down the Slovak roster, it's a mixed bag, and on paper, in the quote-unquote model that I've developed, they are the worst team in the tournament on paper. And certainly after watching them, they are young, and they are also they are indeed struggling quite a bit with just 3 goals through 3 games. So we're gonna do a question and answer, of course, today. But what I will do first, to allow questions to pile up in the chat, I will go through the chat questions that we have gotten in advance of the show, and then catch up through the stream window. So again, thank you for joining me. It's a bit of an old school style show. Be sure to scan all the QR codes on here and help us out however you can. And let's get into it. We have a lot going on to get through. So the first question that we got was, can you make a mixed 2023 and 2024 draft top 10? Of course, with your opinion before the 2023 draft for those players. So I'm just going to pull up my 2023 rankings here. And I am going to pull those up and kill some time while they take some time. Okay, here we go. 2023 rankings. There they are. Nope, they're loading. It's a big spreadsheet. So right off the bat, I know Connor Bedard and Adam Fantilli at least are going ahead of Celebrini. I'd say Celebrini and I'd say Mitch Kov even ahead of Celebrini. I'd say Carlson and Celebrini are kind of in a similar boat. I might give the edge to Celebrini on that one. After that, I think Demidov would come before Carlson. I think then you go Carlson, so that's 6. I had Oliver Moore and Will Smith in there this season. Right now, I've got Berkeley Catton and Caden Lindstrom. I think I'd put Berkeley Catton ahead of Oliver Moore, but only just. Then maybe Oliver Moore, and then probably Will Smith, which brings us up to 9. And then I think I put Lindstrom over Simashev. So there's that, based on what I had last year on the day of the draft, with Simashev and Benson knocking on the door there at the end of the top 10 or at the beginning of the teens, and Gavin Brindley, that is. So that's kind of where I come down on that. I actually did a game of Macklin Celebrini this week. I guess I could just run through the names of tracked players that I've done in the last little while. Again, subscribers to Scouching.ca are getting a newsletter about every 2 or 3 weeks, basically giving snapshot updates of the work that I've been doing, and that's at any tier on the site, so you can feel free to subscribe over there if you want to support us through a newsletter. And so I sent a list of players that has been looked at over the past little while. So let's just run down the list. It's been a long time since we've done like a draft specific show, so bear with me. But we took a look at Miguel Marquez. He moved down a bit. Will Skahan moved down. Michael Hage moved down a little bit. Yegor Surin moved up. Britton Alstead and Gavin Uhlenkamp are 2 high school kids that I took a look at that are playing in the USHL now. They got on the list, but they stayed sort of at the tail end of it. I moved Melvin Fernstrom onto the list and into the 3rd round-ish. Christopher Thibodeau stayed the same. I did a look at Tori Pittner. He moved onto the list. Ilya Pautov stayed on the watch list. My eyes are very itchy. I'm taking care of a cat. I'm sorry. But anyway, Ilya Protas, another guy who I took a look at with data work, and put him in on the list. I got Fyodor Avramov. He stayed the same. Parker Alkos, a defenseman for the Edmonton Oil Kings, who I've kind of liked. He stayed the same on the watch list of the list right now. I took another look at Kuzma Voronin of Youngstown. He moved down. Leon Mugli, the Swiss kid who I believe is injured at the U18s now, he moved up after watching him in the pro level a little bit. Thomas Galvis moved down quite a bit. Kind of have taken a few looks at him in the last week or so just to, see where I fall on him. And he kind of moved down a little bit into the 2nd round for me. I moved Jesse Pulkkinen off the watch list and into the early 3rd-ish range, I think. Macklin Celebrini stayed the same. Zane Parekh, I moved up my list. He's up around 15, I believe, right now. I guess I can close my 2023 list, and you can take a look at my 2024 one as it is now. And again, pitching Scouching.ca. Partner-level subscribers will get access to this spreadsheet as well, so you can follow my list as it changes, as well as look up, I think there's about 1,100 players in the database right now, so you can look up some metrics on whoever you like in there. We're also, and then Sam Dickinson, he stayed the same on my list. Hiroki Gosich I looked at this morning, he stayed the same. Liam Greentree dropped a few spots for me after watching him again today and seeing him at the U18s. Will Villeneuve of the Sudbury Wolves moved down the list a little bit, and that's it. So Again, there's going to be a newsletter that's coming out through scouching.ca if you're a subscriber over there. And there will be some insights with some data work that I've done and just, some thoughts and feelings, I guess you can say, some thoughts and prayers. But anyway, let's get on to the next question here. So, pretty early. It is pretty early. It is 2 p.m. What are your impressions of 2025 prospect Ivan Ryabkin? If you're not familiar, Ryabkin is Dynamo Moscow player, eligible for next year's draft. He is pretty darn good. I've seen him a little bit over the course of the season. I don't think I would stack him up to a Michkov or Demidov, at least not right now. But I do think I like him a little more than I liked Chernyshov at this age. So he probably... I think there's a few good Russians next year, but I'm not going to put my stake in the ground for any of them. Ryabkin, though, I think is one of the better ones. I think for now, in my 2025 list, I have him penciled in somewhere in the teens, somewhere like that for now, because, again, I went through a mid-season crisis and started watching 2025s for a while because 2024 became boring for a little while. Now I'm back on that horse full time. But anyway, Ryabkin's sort of in the middle of the first round there. I honestly, I haven't seen enough of him to be 100% clear on exactly why that is, but I just see Michkov and Demidov as particularly special talents that don't come across very often, and I think Ryabkin is more up that good prospect, Chernyshov level of, Russian, if you're thinking Russians, that kind of level of player, more like maybe a Simashev / whatever. Do you think trading up or trading for a low teens pick to draft Michael Brunzeg-Newgard would be a good second pick for the Habs? So I don't think I would trade up just to draft him. It also depends on where you're drafting. The Montreal Canadiens, I believe, have the 5th best odds to win the lottery. I don't think I'd use a top 5 pick to pick him. I don't think you would need to trade up to draft him if you wanted to draft him that high. I don't think I would draft him that high. For me, if I'm Montreal, if a Berkeley Catton is there, then I'm happy with that. If it's an Ivan Demidov, I am very happy with that. But a second first-round pick, if you can, and use it on Michael Brunzeg-Newgard, I think he would make a great Hab. I think he'd be a good NHL player. I think it would make a lot of sense. He's a name that constantly has come up for me as, at the end of the day, Montreal sometimes surprises people in the draft, and maybe that's a guy they surprise everyone with a bit and take 5th overall. I don't know. It seems like a possibility in my head when I think about what Montreal is like. I do really like Brunzeg-Newgard. He's worked his way back. I think he's at 10th on my list right now. And he's just a guy who I think is just going to be a really, really rock solid NHL player. We got a question from Grav. If you don't know Grav, he's a more popular YouTuber than I am. So feel free to go over to his channel and check him out. But he asked me a question. Do you think that the entire Kazakhstan team should be drafted, or should the entire Kazakhstan team be drafted? And honestly, it was a miracle what they pulled off today. It was a heck of a performance. This tournament, a lot of it so far to me has seemed to be kind of like the playoff race for the last 2 wildcard spots in the East in the NHL, where there's a lot of teams that are just kind of struggling. They're all riding the struggle bus in some way, shape, or form. They just didn't really bring particularly strong lineups, I don't think. And the Czechs have kind of struggled a little bit in this tournament. That game against Canada got out of hand in about 7 minutes, which not ideal. You don't want to be in that position. But anyway, I don't know. I don't honestly think anybody on Kazakhstan is going to be drafted. But the cool thing about the Kazakh team, I will say this, the cool thing about the Kazakh team is they are one of the youngest teams in the league, in the tournament. They are one of 3 teams that their average age on their team is eligible for next season, generally, or at least they're very, very close. And so I think they brought 3 players who are eligible for not next year's draft, but the year after. So Canada brought Gavin McKenna, who has been spectacular. But the Kazakhs have 3 of those guys on the team, and a bunch of guys who can come back next year. So on this sheet, again, available to everyone, this is public, This is, Kazakhstan has 8 players that are eligible to return next year. So does Slovakia. So my hunch is that, if Kazakhstan stays up, then that's incredible. Good for them. That's amazing. But my hunch is that teams like Kazakhstan and Slovakia are bringing younger teams and going, okay, let's start here, and then we'll have a stronger team next year that, and in a lot of these cases, especially with Slovakia, from what I've seen, their 07s have been actually pretty impressive in this tournament. The 06s, not so much. There's actually a few guys where the next year players I think have been really, really impressive here. Malcolm Spence on Canada, Porter Martone on Canada, LJ Mooney in the US has been really, really good. Victor Eklund with the Swedes has been really good this tournament so far. So there's a few guys sort of percolating around there. I also find it funny that Finland has 0 players that will be eligible to return next year, as does Switzerland. But in any case, I'm going on and on and on about this, but yeah. So, but yes, and to answer the question, I don't think anybody on Kazakhstan will get drafted, but Vladimir Nikitin, their goaltender last year, got drafted, presumably after the Division 1A tournament where he was quite good and put his team here. The thing is, with Kazakhstan, one guy on that team last year is still on the team this year. But hey, they won a game. That's incredible. Good for them. Who do you pound the table for in the 5th to 7th rounds of this year? So I thought about this question because a lot, because I don't really, number one, I don't really know how to answer it right now. But then I sort of thought, you know what, I can probably pick out a few guys who will probably be swings that I would take really late in the draft. Right off the bat, Topias Heinonen is 55th in Europe on Central Scouting. He's a guy that I think if he's available in 5, 6, 7 rounds, I would pound the table for him. Who's the other one here? Noel Franzen, 48th in Europe. I think that's another guy who late in the draft, if he's available, could be a really interesting pickup. Fyodor Avramov, 53rd in Europe. I think that's a really interesting option there. I'm surprised he's that low. Part of me wonders if that's because his team played in a good division and came dead last, and he didn't have the best supporting cast around him, and it was a program that not a whole lot of players have ever come from. But I've really liked him when I've seen him. Of course, there's Yuri Tihacek, who still is not ranked by Central Scouting. I think Marcus Kiersey could be a really cool bet late in the draft. Kuzma Voronin, another one who, again, if you want to bet on skill and skating and just raw pace in a game, then so be it. Those are guys that I think I would look at. So there's a few right there. There's a few guys late, like I said, off the top of the show, guy like Britton Alstead, Gavin Uhlenkamp. Those guys are pretty interesting players that might be worth a swing late. Timur Cole, I think, might be available later than he probably should be as well, a defenseman from Russia. There's a few, but it's also very difficult to tell you right now. But those are guys that I feel like I have a hunch would be around at the end of the draft. I'm kind of new to being able to getting viewings on guys a year or two ahead of their draft year, so I was wondering if there's anything in particular that you should keep track on or an eye on as they age into their draft years. Do you find watching guys earlier gives useful context to their strengths and weaknesses in general play in their draft year, and are there pitfalls to watch out for? So my advice in that situation is, if you're thinking about in the context of an NHL draft, relax. I am far, far, far less critical through the context of an NHL draft. I'm far less critical of players a year in advance. I have found it very helpful to at least have a decent knowledge of guys, a decent number of them going into the season, because you really, it's not a must, I don't think, but it's a really good thing to do, because you kind of then see, okay, here's what I saw last year, here's what I remember seeing of them last year, and here's what I see now, how far have they come, right? Like TJ Ginla's a really good example of that. Last year I remember watching him and going, okay, yeah, like this is a smart guy, competitive, but, maybe a guy I could see in maybe the second round, as a more down the lineup energy guy, but then sort of the skill level took a bit of a jump this year. The skating, I think, also has taken a bit of a jump. And so I think that's kind of propelled him up the list. But for me, it's honestly like a lot of it is, just sort of sit back and see what you see and file it away, and don't like the critical, like I am very, very rarely critical of a player, but what I do is look at them and go, okay, I hear a lot about this guy, and I'm not sure I'm seeing what everyone is saying there is, but maybe I'm wrong, and I'll remember what I feel about this guy going into next year. You know, like Aaron Kiviharyu is one of those guys where last year I was watching him and I'm going, I don't like. He's a good, smart passer and all that stuff, but I don't know about that. Like for next year, I'm not so sure. And I watched him this year, and I went, yeah, a lot of the things I was kind of seeing last year haven't really been dealt with. And then he got hurt. Not that there was anything he could do about that. But yeah, so that's the gist of it. Like I find that watching them earlier, you know, you see what they have now. But you also have to be very, very careful with 15, 16-year-olds that, you know, everybody develops at a different pace. Everybody, you know, has different situations that they're in, different tendencies. And so I always, this is why I don't really like questions of people asking about, oh, who is the first overall guy for next year? Or who, you know, how does this year compare to next year or whatever? And it's like, you know, I remember the days when Seth Ambrose was a top prospect, right? When he was 15, 16 years old playing in Omaha, right? Like these things change very often, and it's because these are kids, right? So it is, I think, just a good idea to have a decent understanding of like your vibe on a guy going into a draft year, but I don't really think so much about being super critical or super hyped about a guy, because there's lots of factors that can change between now and a year plus from now, especially when you're dealing with kids that are 16 years old or 15. Okay, and then we got a couple of cooking questions, because I threw that in as a bit of a joke, but some people actually took that seriously. So we got a question about what's harder to cook, penne pasta or gnocchi. I have not cooked gnocchi very often in my life. Penne I have never had a problem with. So usually when I have something that I've never cooked before and I try to cook it, it's a disaster. So I'm going to go with gnocchi because I'm not nearly as familiar with how to cook that stuff as opposed to just plain old regular pasta. You know, the problem for me with pasta is I always end up making too much. You know, I always overshoot, and then I end up with a bunch of leftover dry pasta in the fridge that you know. And after a certain point in time, you really, really shouldn't eat that stuff. So anyway, that's my issue with cooking penne pasta. But in terms of actually cooking it well, never a problem. And then we got a question regarding breakfast about waffles, hotcakes, or French toast. This one's easy to me. It's waffles, and I don't make waffles at home. I don't have a waffle maker. I'm not a waffle person at home. At home, I just make pancakes because we have a griddle. And I'm lazy, and it's easy. But the thing about pancakes for me is that they're not like I like them fluffy, but I find it difficult to get them how fluffy I like it at home. The thing about waffles is that they have crevices in it, right? I don't like pancakes because they're flat surfaces, right? It's like a shield volcano. Everything just falls off of it. You know, unless you eat it really fast, which eating a pancake really fast is a miserable experience for me. I don't like French toast, honestly. I've always felt it kind of just has this weird taste that I don't really like. I do kind of dig French toast when it's like not made with syrup and served with syrup. I mean, it's like more of a cinnamon sugar type vibe if I want something sweet in the morning, but I don't usually make it. And waffles, I think they have the chasms in which you can place things. They fit a raspberry perfectly. They fit blueberries. They fit syrup. You can put whipped cream in them. It's awesome. So I'm a big fan of waffles. And I think that is it for all of the questions that led into the show. I believe we had one about who's going to sign Liam Kirk from Mark, the illustrious UK hockey fan who loves the Toronto Marlies. And Mark, I love you, but I think Liam Kirk is still a bit of a ways away from that. But I'm looking forward to seeing him for Great Britain for sure. Internationally, although I think they're already playing. I think Great Britain is already playing, but I could be wrong. There's too many tournaments going on, and I mean, I would love to talk about the tournament going on in Uzbekistan right now. I saw a news story last week about Thailand winning against Kuwait 57-0, and the shots were like 112 to like 5. So obviously, me being me, I went in I fully dove into that tournament to like find out as much as I possibly could because I thought it was simply incredible and just something that deserved some attention. And I mean, we could talk about that too, but man, I am a sucker for low level hockey and crazy things that happen in this sport. And that tournament is, it wasn't just that Thailand game. It's been quite an adventure, and Uzbekistan is going into a final game against Thailand, I believe tomorrow or the day after or something like that. The semifinals were today, so I actually tuned in to watch a little bit of Mongolia, Thailand. So that was a fun one too. But yeah, really interesting stuff there. But you know what? I love it because the IHF is like putting on tournaments and stuff in countries that, these places do have rinks. But you want to grow the game. Like, that's how you do it. This is how you do it. Honestly, like, the hockey program in Thailand, I feel like, has come quite a ways over the last decade. Obviously, they're not in the World Championships or anything, but considering, I think they started with a rink in a mall, and now there's quite a few players playing there, and obviously at this tournament they have been dominant generally. Them and Uzbekistan and Mongolia have been dominant. The Mongolian roster has some S tier names. I mean, I love everything about Mongolia. I just love. So their hockey team just factors into that as well. But in any case, it's a good time. It's a good time. That tournament has been a really good time. The other thing too I want to mention about that Thailand game that no one really seems to be mentioning, Kuwait, who has now forfeited from the tournament, they only brought 14 skaters to the tournament. Thailand had a full roster. So not only is there the quality mismatch there of Thailand, a team that has had international experience before, and Kuwait, who is just beginning their sort of program, they brought really cool jerseys. I will say Kuwait brought cool sort of circus clown looking jerseys, which I think look cool. I mean that respectfully and in a good way. But Thailand brought a full team. They brought just over half of a full team. So yes, it was a bit of a disaster. But anyway, I can close that now. We can move on and get into some chat questions. So again, if you have any questions for the show, feel free to drop them in the chat. We'll get to them when I get to it. I am obviously famously long-winded, so we'll get to it when we get to it. But we will get to it, I promise. If you're Brian McClellan in Washington, how do you draft this year at 16? Okay, I'm gonna say this. I think this is the first time I've said this, and I think it's going to be the first of many going into draft season. It really depends on who is drafted already. I don't know. Like, if Berkeley Catton is there, which is a possibility, easy pick there. Sure, easy pick. If by some miracle Ivan Demidov is there, easy pick. I mean, for me as well in this draft, from 3 to 19, I wouldn't want to be drafting high in that range. So that's at the tail end of that range. So if you have a guy like, I don't know, Cole Iserman or Michael Brandstad-Newgard or Zane Parekh or, Igor Chernyshov, those guys might make sense if I'm Washington. But it just really depends. I mean, I feel like someone very good is going to be available there. I think Washington drafts pretty well. They've got Ryan Leonard. They've got Ivan Miroshnichenko in the playoffs, or for the one game in the playoffs, I should say. So they've drafted pretty decently. Hendrix Lapierre with that really solid performance the other night. Unfortunately, it was in a losing effort, but nonetheless. It just really depends on who is there, who's been picked, and what you think you might be able to get into later into the draft if you're Washington. I will also say I have a program that I wrote that sort of simulates the draft based on everybody's rankings that I track. There's about 24 of them in there. And so I think I've run that a few times so I can simulate it with Washington's picks. But I can't do that live right now because it would require quite a bit of work. So I'll give it a go after the show, and we'll see who might be some names that might be available for them. Between the two of Catton and Lindstrom, which player is more likely to reach their ceiling in the NHL? I mean, I think that's a lot more complicated than one or the other. It really depends on a lot of things. I think Lindstrom has a more safer potential in the NHL. Like, I think at the very worst, you're going to get a energetic middle six, physical, well-rounded sort of power forward there who can mix it up. He can get physical. He can, if he needs to, he's dropped the gloves in the past. That's cool. I think Catton, though, has, like, I think Catton's ceiling is, as an NHL sort of special NHL talent, I think is there. Lindstrom, I think, has maybe some vision issues, like with the puck on his stick and carrying the puck, and some of the decisions that he makes are kind of a little bit soft to me, and a little slow, and he can sort of, I feel like he could be a frustrating player and might take a little bit of time to settle into an NHL role of some kind, whereas Berkeley Catton, he's either going to have his job and do extremely well at it, or it's going to take quite a while for him to find a role in the NHL that's going to work. Like, he's a premier transition guy, premier quarterback, wonderful playmaker in the offensive zone, just a very well-rounded offensive player with a great mind for the game. And Lindstrom just has so much talent, and so it's kind of like two sides of a coin, and you're asking me heads or tails. A lot of things depend, right? Like, the wind could blow and flip the coin an extra time, and then it would be Catton, right? Like, I don't know. But personally, I lean Catton. I've got Catton higher. I think the battle uphill for Lindstrom is steeper because it's not so much a puck management issue for him, it's not so much a puck management issue for Catton. It's more of a can Catton, create gaps and create space and deceive NHL level players. Whereas with Lindstrom, it's like, he'll be able to hang physically, he'll be able to hang skill wise, he's got a good shot, he can hang talent wise, but where he settles into a lineup, I think, really remains to be seen. Oh, Austin Brass is here. Hello, Austin. How are you? Long time no talk. How's the fam? Sick child. Okay, there's the answer to how the fam is. Questions. 1. Raul Boyard is one player I seem to be higher on than most. Am I crazy? I mean, well, it depends on what you mean by high on. For me, Boyard is a really smart guy. Another one of these just really smart, smart on the puck guys. He times his passes really well in transition. He stops up and creates gaps really well. Like, he does that sort of, he's kind of like that really low pace sort of version of Berkeley Catton in a way, without sort of the same skill level, without the same sort of scoring ability. But in terms of transition play and getting pucks up the ice and creating gaps with people and everything, I think per puck touch, he's a really smart player. It's just that there's not a whole lot of volume for me with Boyard. Like, he plays on a great team, but he's not always the biggest factor in his team's offense from what I've seen. He's obviously a factor, but I've been kind of cool on Boyard. And again, for me, the line of what I approve of in Quebec is pretty high. You've got to be a pretty high-end player there for me to sort of go, okay, I could see this working in the American League and beyond. Sure. Boyard, I think, kind of rides that line for me because of just how smart he is. But, over a couple of years, I could see some development going his way. And, I mean, if you have him in the first round, I think that's a little high. But if you like players that are smart and you can just go, okay, we'll work on the tools over the next few years, but we love the brain, we love the kid, we love this and love that. Yeah, sure, fine. Second round pick in this year's class, fine. I could see it. What keeps Michael Hage outside the top 15? So Hage is weird. I do really like him. He's at 22 on my list right now. Super skilled. Really applies his skill level well. Hits his passes accurately pretty well. Great puck carrier up the ice. But for me, it's like, projecting him to the NHL. There's a lot of similarities in a way to me with like a Matthew Coronado, who has been an NHL player and has been very good in the AHL. But Hage doesn't really bring the same sort of defensive intensity that I think Coronado brought. I think Hage projects as more of an offense-leaning winger, even though he's played center most of the games I've seen this year, if not all of them. And I think I think he'd be very, I think if you shelter his role a little bit, I think he could be a really effective offensive player just with that raw skill level. And, he just kind of finds the right ways to sneak through opposing defenses and find lanes and little pockets of space to play in. And, below the goal line, he can sort of, strip guys of the puck and make plays quickly below the goal line and deep in the offensive zone, which is always very handy. But for me, it's just a matter of like, the pace of his game is sometimes a little bit low. The defensive abilities are iffy, I would say. And I think that for him, it's like a complimentary offensive guy in a good way. Sure. And if that's a mid to late first round pick, yeah, I could see it. But I think there's a bit of an uphill battle for him in terms of NHL level sort of pace and level of play. Hello, Luke, big Blackhawks fan. Was curious for your opinion on who would be the best pick in the top 4 and what players to look at with Tampa's pick. Well, I mean, my thing with Chicago, like, yes, you could argue that maybe up the middle you could use a little bit more depth, but for me, I mean, I just think about Connor Bedard sharing the ice with Ivan Demidov for the next 10 years and go, oh, yeah, I think I'd rather do that. The rest of the picture kind of doesn't really matter. Like with Berkeley Catton and Caden Lindstrom, like you could argue that Caden Lindstrom might bring something that Chicago kind of could use a little more of in their pipeline. They have Frank Nazar, who's been great with Michigan and, obviously scored a goal in his NHL debut. And he's a bit more of that well-rounded sort of talent-first guy with good smarts as well. But for me, it's just, I mean, if Demidov is there at 4 and you have an opportunity to pair him, to me, it's like the opportunity that Edmonton had to add Cole Caulfield to Connor McDavid, right? Like, imagine those two guys were able to play together instead of Philip Broberg, right? Which at the time, it was obvious that was the move for me if I'm Edmonton. So if I'm Chicago, I think they're in a similar moment where they have their franchise-level offensive player in Connor Bedard, and then you have a potentially elite complementary player to that, like Ivan Demidov, where you can kind of go, the defense is the only area you can critique, and I don't even think it's that awful. But the playmaking potential, where Cole Caulfield is a goal scorer, Ivan Demidov is a playmaker. And him and Connor Bedard together makes a ton of sense to me. And you've got sort of Oliver Moore and Nazar as sort of your depth behind them. You can draft plenty of defensemen elsewhere to round out your lineup. They already have a few young defensemen who seem to be coming into their own already on the NHL team. So, yeah, I see Demidov as probably the guy that I would be really pounding the table for if he was there at Chicago's pick. If it isn't him, then I could see maybe a Lindstrom making sense, a Zeev Buyum maybe making sense, but you did just draft Kevin Korchinski. Artyom Levshinov might make sense, give you a bit of a different vibe. Go with a guy like Alex Vlasic, who's been good this year, has turned into an interesting defensive player. But to me, it's like Demidov, and if not him, I mean, no team, I think, gets worse with Berkeley Catton on it, and Caden Lindstrom, I think, makes an interesting fit there as well. And at the Tampa pick, I don't know. I mean, if like a Zane Parekh is there, I would give him a swing. Nikita Artemonov maybe could be an interesting addition to Chicago in the late first round. Just a guy who brings a lot of energy, has a decent amount of skill to him, really drives to the right spots well, already playing at a high level and doing pretty well. And just sort of, I think, complements what Chicago brings while also bringing the kinds of work rate and competitiveness and intensity level that I think Chicago likes in the draft. Let me close my notes. This is distracting me. Okay. Is it weird that the LA Kings prospect system is not quite reaching the levels we thought they would? Why do guys like Alex Turcotte seem to not be taking the next step? So the LA Kings, let me just pull them up here. This is also a Scouching partner level perk that you get. So yeah, so the LA Kings, I think what the LA Kings maybe learned over time, I mean, number one, I think the LA Kings just have a lot of good players on their team that make it difficult to crack that lineup. But I think with the LA Kings, I mean, with Turcotte, he spent a lot of time hurt. And whenever I watched him in the NHL this year, it was kind of like watching Shane Wright in the NHL before that last stretch of the season this year. And even then, right, I kind of went, I can see it. I can see the thing there. I can see a player there somewhere, but it just hasn't happened yet. And it just hasn't come out yet. I think what LA did over the last few years that I personally would disagree with was draft a lot of just pure skill guys. Like guys like trying to look at the list off the right here. Guy like really high skill but skill first guys. Kim Nuziainen was one of them. Martin Chromiak, Cohen Zemer, I think, is skill first, and there's not a whole lot rounding that out. Casper Simon Tyval, I think, was all speed and skill, but again, a player who the more I watched, the more I kind of questioned. And I'm not sure what is going sort of quote unquote wrong. I mean, they are a playoff team. I think that their series with Edmonton is closer than a 3-1 series might indicate. That game last night was crazy. They probably should have won that game, but Stuart Skinner decided to, come down from heaven and keep the Edmonton Oilers in the control room there on that series. But, I think with the LA Kings, I mean, they kind of pinballed back from that. And, look, the way I see it is it's not a bad thing to approach the draft the way the Kings at least used to, by focusing on skill and focusing on sort of that upside idea, because then you get guys that come out of the woodwork and surprise you, that can sort of crack the team. Guys like Jordan Spence, guys like Alex Laferriere. There we go. Now, I'm not the biggest fan of Laferriere based on his NHL play, but he hasn't been bad, and he's looked decent in the playoffs. But he's also a guy that sort of came out of the woodwork as a lower than top round player. But there were a couple of drafts there where they just drafted a lot of skill guys that to people in the public were too low. And when you sort of watch them in detail, you kind of go, okay, but there's more to the game than this that they kind of lack. And it's been tough to sort of watch them sort of try to gain it. But then on the other hand, then they turn around and draft for size a lot of the time recently, right? Kirill Kirsanov, Sam Helenius, those are two gigantic guys. Jakub Dvorak, just guys where you're going, okay, I see what you're going for there, but again, I think you've kind of overcompensated in the other direction. But also that might be easy for me to say because hindsight is 2020. But there's a balance to everything, and I feel like the LA Kings have just kind of bounced from one kind of extreme to another. But I don't think it's like that bad, and I feel like guys like Turcotte, he's been doing fine. Turcotte has been, but it's not quite there with Turcotte, for example. It's just I think he's that close, but the fact that he's that close means that there's still a pretty big gap, because a guy like him can't afford to be like that close a lot of the time. Like it just the way that he plays, and very brain first and sort of thinking first, and he's a bit of a ways away there, and that's an issue. Which players have impressed you in the under 18s and disappointed the most? Well, I mean, I don't think anybody's really disappointed me. I think I was looking for a little more so far out of Liam Greentree. I have not seen a whole lot of him this tournament. A guy like Cole Baudouin, I think, has been really impressive. If we're talking NHL draft guys for this year, that guy has stuck out to me. TJ Ginla, I think, has also had a good tournament for Canada. Marek Vanacker, I think, also has had a pretty good tournament. On Sweden, I mean, they're playing kind of okay. I mean, my boy Alphonse Frey has been doing everything but scoring points, I think, for them. Victor Eklund has been good, but he's for next year. But even this year's draft prospects, right? Guys like Lucas Pettersson and Melvin Fernstrom and Jack Berglund, I think they've all kind of been fine. Linus Eriksson also decent, I would say. So yeah, they've been kind of fine. The U.S., I mean, Brody Zemer's been really good in this tournament. Teddy Stieg has been great. I think E.J. Emery has had a pretty good tournament defensively as well. Who else? Cole Hudson has looked really good at this tournament as well. Trevor Connolly. I think the U.S. team has been very scary. I think they're guys for next year. Hagens and LJ Mooney and Logan Hensler. They've all been good this season as well, or in this tournament as well. On Finland, I would say Daniel Nieminen has been really good from what I've seen. Emil Hemming has also been good from what I think I've seen. I'd say Constant Hellenius has been about what I expected. I think he has 1 or 2 even strength points at this point. And so, I mean, when I'm watching him, I'm going, yep, that's the Constant Hellenius I remember. That's the same guy. Same thing with Kivi Harju, right? Like, yeah, he's got points, but I think they're all on the power play so far. And when the story for me with that kind of thing, right? If it's just power play stuff, like I've watched Kivi Harju would even strengthen this tournament and felt he's been fine. Yes, he's been missing a lot of time, but the same strengths and weaknesses I think are still there. The guy on Finland that I am really interested in is Joona Saarelainen. He's been really good in this tournament so far for Finland. He's had a really good time. The Czechs, I like Andre Kosh. I think Adam Jeko's been okay, but yeah, I don't know. The Czechs obviously losing to Kazakhstan today doesn't really give them a whole lot of the benefit of the doubt, but they've been kind of okay. No one's really been a standout for me on that team. Adam Banak's been pretty good, but I wouldn't signal the neighbors about him, I guess you could say. Switzerland, Jamir Reber, again, same kind of guy. I think Danil Ustinkov has played pretty well. Leon Mugli also played pretty well until he got injured. Loris Vai's been kind of neat, but I wouldn't say anyone has been like mind-blowing on that team. Slovakia has not been good. There's a couple of guys for next year that I noted down that were kind of interesting looking. I am fascinated by Miroslav Shatan Jr., who is gigantic and fast and nothing else. It's kind of amazing. I watched him. I was watching Daniel Nieminen isolated yesterday, and there was a moment where I think Nieminen was at the center line skating backwards, and Shatan was at his defensive blue line, and the puck had been dumped into Finland's zone. Nieminen makes a pivot, starts skating to retrieve the puck. Shatan covers the entire ice surface in about 6 strides. It was insane. He's just ripping and wins the battle to the loose puck. So it's like, did anything happen because of it? Not really, no. But still, the point is, you have a giant, fast guy who is there, and he's fascinating. He's a fascinating one. Norway, I can't say I've seen a ton of Norway in this tournament. Elias Vatna has been pretty good. Again, a guy who I don't think has taken the step this year that I kind of was hoping him to take. Tinus Koblar for next year, I think, has looked good as well. I wouldn't be surprised if they didn't get relegated this year based on the team they have, but I haven't seen them as like a mind-blowing roster. Latvia, Maxims Hartontsevs, if that's his name, I don't know how to pronounce it, but he's been a guy I've seen here and there in Sweden over the course of the season, and I thought he's been okay in this tournament. Daryl Zuljanskis has been okay. I do like Maxims Pumpens. He's been not only a great name, but he's been pretty good as well. Martins Klaukans, also decent, and he's a guy I think he's a 2008 born kid. So he was pretty decent in the games that I saw for Latvia. Kazakhstan, I only have seen fractions of a game, and they are a team that is there. I don't expect any of these guys to get drafted, but who knows? After today, maybe everything has changed. Maybe Ablakhan Tulobai is on an NHL draft list at some point. I don't even know if he was the guy that was in net today. Which teams amongst the rumored trademark names do you want for Utah, and why is it the Yetis? Uh, Honestly, I don't know. I don't think I've liked. Let me just look it up so that I can see it. So yeah, the Blizzard, no, hard no. The Fury, I think it's too close to the Wild, and you're pretty close geographically-ish to Minnesota, I think. The Utah Ice, no. Utah Mammoth, no. Outlaws, no. Venom, I mentioned the Sting as a team that AJ didn't particularly like, but because they are called the Beehive State. But Venom, I mean, there's lots of venomous animals in Utah, and sure, it'd be kind of cool. The Yetis, I feel like everybody seems to really like it, but I don't know how I feel about it because I don't think they don't use it anymore. But the Colorado Avalanche used a Yeti footprint as their alternate logo for a while, and I've always sort of associated the idea of a Yeti with Colorado, or at least the Avalanche. And with Utah, I've been to Utah. I don't really associate Utah with snow things very often. They do get snow there. There is skiing there. There are mountains, and it's very beautiful. But it's not really what I associate with Utah a whole lot. I mean, honestly, this might be a hot take. This might be a dumb hot take. But I'm very curious about going with a European style name where like Utah HC or the Utah Hockey Club, like it kind of has a ring to it that I kind of like. I don't know why, and it's not going to happen. I don't think it's going to happen. But I kind of don't mind that idea, and I think you could do a lot of really creative things with it. Like you could change your jerseys like they do in Europe all the time. You could do whatever you want, and you could get real crazy with it. And there's no rules when you're named that, right? So I think it could be a cool idea. Give it a try. It seems like it is going to be called the Utah Hockey Club for at least the first season. I kind of liked the idea of the Washington football team. It sounds silly, but I mean, also, this is a thing too, right? If I'm getting on a high horse a little. But the thing that I love is, like, imagine there was a hockey team coming out and they were like, there was social media and they're like, we're putting a hockey team in Toronto and we're going to call it the Maple Leafs. We're going to name it after a part of a tree. Huh? What do you think? Right? Like, I mean, I know that's not what the Toronto Maple Leafs are named after, but like, there are two teams in Canada named the Canadiens, the Canucks and the Canadiens. The Carolina Hurricanes. They have hurricanes in Carolina, cool. But like the suggestion of most names sounds kind of silly. The Tampa Bay Lightning. So why can't Venom work if lightning is a thing, right? So whenever people like judge names and everything, for me it's more about like, what's the identity around the name? Like, why are you naming the team this? Like, what's the vibe gonna be? And I feel like there's a lot of potential to play around with it. I just find it really funny when people critique and criticize names of teams when it's like, well, I mean, yeah, on the surface you want a team that sounds cool, but a lot of NHL teams, a lot of sports teams in general, if they were made today, I think fans would be like, what the hell is this name? But in that day and age, there was nothing the fans could do about it. They didn't have a voice, right? Like they didn't get to go on the internet and complain about it or make fun of it. So anyway, it's fun. I'm getting sweaty. Okay. Alex Zetterberg draft prediction. He's a very late first, early second to me. I think he's one of the best passers in the draft, but size and transition will drop him later. I mean, Zetterberg is tricky because he's a guy that, you really like. I would never touch him in the first round, right? Like the whole thing about the first round to me is you got to make sure that you do a good job in the first round. The first guy you pick, you better do a good job. And with Zetterberg, I think that there is just too many question marks. I think if he's the third or fourth guy I'm drafting, I'm happy. If that's the late second round, early third round, sure. But again, like when you're 5'8"-ish, you have a very, very, very high bar to hit. And with Zetterberg, like the shot quality, the puck skill, those are two things that I think need to come a long ways to be NHL caliber. I think his defensive game is kind of really questionable. His intensity level is questionable. He's very quick on his edges in terms of making gaps to opponents and creating options for himself with the puck. But I have found every time I've seen Zetterberg, it's like he's a guy that needs space. He needs space to do what he does. And if you're a player like that, it's very difficult to make it work in the NHL, right? Like just look at the Toronto Maple Leafs. They're a team that clearly desperately needs space in order to do anything. So when you forecheck hard, they buckle. And so when I look at a guy like Zetterberg, I think he's a guy that fans are going to get excited about because I think he'll score. But I feel like his career is more headed towards like a good SHL player, like a good European player, and maybe a cup of coffee in the NHL. I just don't know if there's enough there for a player that size to find their way into the NHL on a consistent basis. So I would expect him to be sort of a mid-round pick-ish. And watching him in this tournament, I haven't really been blown away either. Like, it hasn't really changed my mind on him a whole lot. I know he's a 2025 eligible, but how is Victor Eklund looking compared to his brother at the same time? I honestly really have liked Victor Eklund. I've seen him a bit playing with Linus Eriksson in Hockey Allsvenskan. And I think that he brings a little bit more of a straightforward, projectable style of game than his brother. I think William, brought more raw skill and pace in his game and quickness and all those talent things that you really like to see. But the strategy behind his thinking seemed a little bit mixed a lot of the time. He was trying to take on a little bit too much for himself. And I think Victor Eklund just sort of goes, give me the puck, I'm going to get in the offensive zone, go to the net and make a play. Right? Like there isn't a whole lot of dawdling with Victor Eklund from what I've seen. Whereas with William, again, no disrespect at all. I love William Eklund. But the thing about him that I think was, that I highlighted at the time, but now it's kind of struggling a little bit more than I thought it would is, adapting his style of play to the intensity and the speed of the NHL. Like you see the evasion and the skill and, but just his ability to, just transport the puck up the ice, going northbound and not worrying so much about east and west, and trying to sort of control possession himself so much. I think that's the thing that he's needed to work on and has still kind of, struggled a little bit. We'll see how he does now that David Quinn is gone. David Quinn, who is a guy who historically hasn't had the best track record with skill first players like Eklund, but I thought Eklund took a good step forward this year. And his brother, I think, with a good sort of more simplistic approach, which I think is a good thing, I think looks like a very interesting player for next year. When is Dmitry Ovchinnikov going to own the NHL? Never. I think he's going back to I think he's going back to Russia already. I think there was a report that he's going back to play for Sibir next season, and I get the feeling that after having seen him in the AHL a few times this year, like I think he jumped over the pond too quickly. I don't know what happened there. I don't know why they brought him over, to be perfectly honest. Like he was not playing big minutes in the KHL and he was scratched a bunch with the Marlies and, it was just a little bit too much too soon. So I don't know if the plan is, my thought with Ovchinnikov ever since he was drafted was give him 5 years in Russia. Just leave him there for a while. Just let him work up the depth chart and get to where you think he could be because he's, going to have an easier time in that system than jumping over to North America. And he didn't. They signed him and brought him over, and I don't know what happened, but he has not been phenomenal. Lastly, Austin, okay, well, you don't need to be the last. It's cool. I'm at the point of watching Overagers. Who's your most obscure Overager that you're in love with? I'm debating Ty Hansen or Oliver Tulk. So, yeah, Oliver Tulk is not getting drafted. I'm sorry, Austin. I don't think that's going to happen. Ty Hansen is neat, I suppose. I don't think I'm jumping at the bit to draft him. But the overagers, let's just sort my rankings by age. I think Peter Vesterheim is a guy who is really interesting. Arvid Bergstrom, another one who I think has been very good and probably deserves a late round swing. I really liked Mitch Young, defenseman for the Sarnia Sting this year. I watched a bit of him like a month ago or whatever, and he's on the watch list as a guy that brings a lot of really interesting offensive tools, I think, to the picture. So those are the guys I think that jump to mind. I mean, Tahacek, of course, but, and he won't get drafted. But yeah, I mean, of all of them, though, I'd say that probably my favorite to watch that I don't think will get drafted, I mean, it might be Bergstrom at this point. Bergstrom, maybe Mitch Young. Bergstrom. Mitch Young's at least on Central Scouting's list. He's 203rd. Go figure. But yeah, I need to be hydrated. One moment. I had a salty lunch of Thai food leftovers. Do Sweden have the goaltending to do anything in this tournament? I mean, I was really looking forward to Love Harenstam this season. He's come with a lot of fanfare from Sweden, and from what I've seen, he's been pretty good over in Sweden this year, and he has not been particularly great for them in net this year at the under 18s. But yeah, I mean, that could be an issue for them. And the lack of goal scorers, yeah, you're right. They do seem to lack that. Lucas Pettersson, again, I think he's a guy that's just dropped on my list over the course of the year. Melvin Fernstrom, yeah, he's got 31 goals this year, but I don't think a whole lot of it is off of, I'm just going to take it to the house myself and go nuts. Jakub Wozniak is a guy who I am a little lukewarm on. I know he's got a ton of points and he's big and everything this year, but at this tournament, a guy that produces like that, you would expect to make himself a little more known. And going into this tournament, I was a little bit skeptical about the production that he had. But yeah, I mean, maybe I just need to go back and watch more of him. But they don't really seem to have guys that go out there and, guys like an Alex Holtz or whoever who can just crank the puck into the net 3 times a night. What's the appeal of EJ Emery? EJ Emery. I like EJ Emery. Let me see here. EJ Emery. Oh, do we have audio problems? No. Okay. Just Brian Stewart and Brian Stewart having problems. Well, where was I? Oh yeah. What is the appeal of EJ Emery? So Emery is a guy who I have right at the bottom of my list, but he is there. I think with Emery, it's, he skates pretty well. He's very big and beefy, which you like, cool. Good to have. Skates pretty well, especially sort of laterally. Well, not laterally, but on his edges, skating forwards and covering ice left to right and monitoring breakouts and all that stuff. He's pretty good at it. I think he's just sort of a guy that maybe has a safer floor. He already kind of looks like a guy who could potentially be an NHL defender, and I think that sticks in people's minds of like, if you see a kid out there who already has sort of NHL size in your mind, that kind of makes him stick out. For me with Emery, it's like the results aren't great. Like he's an okay puck mover, but the defending, it's like he's kind of like the US version of Charlie Ellick in a way, but not as, not maybe a little bit smarter with how he applies his physicality, but also not as good of a skater, I guess you could say. I don't know, kind of the same way their brain is wired, but different sort of application of it. So it's a little strange, but yeah, he's been an interesting one for me. And I think at this tournament, he's been pretty good, but the U.S. hasn't really been tested a whole lot so far. And I think even when he has been pushed a little bit, like when you get close to him and push him on his heels a little bit, that's when things kind of fall apart for Emery, which to me is a problem. But you know what? If he's a second round pick, I feel like, yeah, you might get a bottom pair guy out of him. I think an NHL coach will look at him and go, yeah, we could play you. Sure. Play 10 minutes. Let's see what you can do. Go nuts, kid. And see what he can do. Survivor thoughts. Oh, geez. Okay. So Survivor this season, I think it's season 47, is a mess. It's a mess in a good way. I've really enjoyed it. It's funny how in recent years Survivor has gone from, it's the first few episodes are awful, I find. They're They find so many reasons to make it impossible to follow what's going on, and there's always such a dramatic storyline that they focus an entire episode on almost, that you lose track of what's going on elsewhere or who's on other tribes or whatever. But then when things sort of coalesce a little bit and focus as the season goes on, holy smokes, things turn around the last couple of seasons, and this season is no different. Oh my God, what a mess. I won't spoil it for anyone in case anybody is behind or hasn't seen it and wants to or whatever. But if you like, let's just put it this way. If you like watching train wrecks of people, like people train wrecks, you know, in a lot of different ways, you know, people who are just not compatible with each other personality wise, people who are, I would argue, need therapy, people who are, you know, all over the map of whatever, that you with only like 2 or 3 people who I think if they're sitting around, they're probably going, what is wrong with everybody on this frickin' island? Like, what are we doing wrong? There's like a couple of people who are normal-ish, but the outside the norm people are absolutely crazy, and it's well worth the watch. I highly recommend this season of Survivor. If you like TV that's a little bit, you know, trashy in a way. Most Survivor seasons are not like this, but it is a good one. We also just started the most recent season of The Circle, by the way, which is an excellent program on Netflix. A very interesting reality show, if that's what you're into. But if not, that's cool too. Did you see Pronman put Yakimchuk as a top 2 prospect? Yes, I did. I disagree. Again, I say this a lot, but based on what I have been able to piece together and gather over the years, it really feels like, Bob McKenzie is outward about it, that he sources his rankings from scouts. So it's not really his opinion. It's just him sourcing the work from others and sort of regurgitating it, which is fine. He's outward about it. I would be very surprised if Sam Cosentino and Corey Pronman at the very least are hearing things from NHL teams and speaking to NHL people or hockey people that they know and going, you know, what do you think is going to happen? Like, I think that they seem to be more in the trying to gauge what NHL teams think game rather than here's what I think game. Because, I mean, I read Pronman's write-ups about players, and yeah, like, they generally read about how I see them, but the way that he sort of comes down on players, it's almost like it's like obfuscating what he actually thinks, like kind of on purpose. Like, the ratings are very vague. The explanations are very sort of high level, sort of, you know, there's a lot of like, teams love this player, teams love this guy, teams have nothing but good things to say about this, teams are concerned about this, teams are high on this ability, blah, blah, blah. Which, like, cool. I don't care about any of that stuff. Like, if I'm a scout myself, I don't care what other scouts really think that much, especially if I'm reading your work for your opinion. So to me, it's like, if that's what NHL scouts are seeing in Yakimchuk, a top 5 guy, top 3 guy, by all means, be my guest, right? Like, David Reinbacher, top 5 or whatever last year, I would never do it. I wouldn't have done it, but I kind of get it. I guess I see it. I had him in the first round, but not nearly that high. But I guess I can see it. Sure, fine, whatever. I'm not going to complain. I'll just draft someone else, right? Like that's cool. This draft has more players with potential fatal flaws than I can remember in the draft. That's true. I mean, there's a lot of guys who have flaws that are very noticeable, but you also have to be very careful because that's also kind of true very quickly in most draft classes. I think this draft gets very even much quicker than other drafts. And then there's a lot of really interesting ideas of players later on that might turn into something interesting. But for me, yeah, there's a lot of question marks in this draft. There's a lot of guys who are really, really, really smart players, but the ability just isn't quite there, at least not yet. There's a lot of really talented players where you just want to pull your hair out watching them sometimes. There are some guys that are a little undersized and maybe really skilled, but are just a hair short of that next level of ability to sort of produce like an undersized player kind of needs to. So yeah, it's going to be a weird class, I think, and it's going to be fun to keep an eye on it down the road in the next couple of years. It's going to be fascinating, I think, to see how this all shakes out. Do you see anything there with Brody Zemer? So I have Zemer on my watch list, I think, or he's the last name ranked for me. I like Brody Zemer. I think he's, again, like very, very smart. He's one of those guys, very smart, very capable puck handler, very good complimentary, smart dude to have. I think he's a guy that you maybe, I mean, if, like, again, it's not like I don't enjoy watching the player play, but if a team wants him at like 40, I'll let them do it. I'll probably draft someone else, but I could also see how at 40 you end up with a guy that on your third line, you put him with, more skilled or more physical and high-paced guys, and he can move the puck well and sort of chip in well. That's kind of where I come down on him. I think he's going to be a really good college player. I think he's going to do pretty well there. And the NHL upside, I think, is still a question mark, but if you leave him in college for 3-4 years, I could see how you end up with a pretty smart and capable pass first, pass heavy type player. Who would you say is the best player in the Quebec League this year? Well, I mean, a lot of people I think would point to Massé. I think Massé's been okay at the under 18s, but I wouldn't say he's like blown my mind. I feel like my top rated Q guy is Marcus Kiersey. Yeah, Kiersey and Boyard. They're within 20 spots of each other on my list, but a tier apart. I have Kiersey too high, I think, but I still just really love. There aren't very many defensemen in the draft this year who do what Kiersey does really, really well. The bad things with Kiersey are really bad. They're like the moments where you go, ugh, and sort of like grip the table a little bit, you're really gripping the table. But the way that he skates and the way that he reads breakouts and the way that he gets to loose pucks and the way that he gets to guys in the neutral zone and challenges them and is involved offensively and sort of trying to prevent defensive entries in the first place, I think is exactly the type of defenseman that I look for. The mind of connecting on passes in transition with the sort of head fakes and the directional changes and the baits and switches are all really impressive with him. So those are all things that I think have come together with Kiersey that make him a really interesting player. Boyard, I think, just has a lower ceiling, but the brain is there, the thinking is there. There's a lot of ingredients there, but the rest of the pie, I don't think has been baked yet. And with Kiersey, parts of the pie are missing, but right now the pie is a little tastier. The ingredients in the bowl are a little tastier. It just hasn't really been baked yet. What made you move Parekh up? He's been injured lately, so I was interested in what forced the move. Well, it isn't so much about what forced the move as much as it is like in that range. I just kind of go, everybody here has some sort of problem. But with Parekh, it's like when he has really good moments, they are really impressive. He is an extreme player in the most literal sense of the word to me. Like, I mean, I don't know. I feel like I'm being gaslit a little bit about how he plays in his own end. It's I don't know. I really feel like I need to choose my words carefully. The game I just did of him, the first period was excellent. I thought he was moving the puck. He was passing the puck hard. He was hitting his targets accurately. He was challenging in the offensive zone tremendously. Pinching up from the blue line along the boards and hemming pucks in the offensive zone a lot. If you like the sort of Carter Yakimchuk skill move type thing, I think he's better at it. He does it at a higher pace of play. His shot is really good. There's a lot of good things about Parekh, and I think for me, it's like I kind of thought about it and just sort of went, all right, look, like, to me, I was talking to Joel Henderson a little while ago, and he threw out, after watching a bit of Parekh, he threw out John Klingberg. And to me, it's like I see a similar player there as a John Klingberg, like a guy who every so often he'll be a 70-point defenseman in the NHL or something, and you go, holy smokes, this guy's incredible, holy crap.
But then the more you pay attention, you go, okay, but at what cost, right? Like, what cost is it for him to score 70 points, right? And when the offense isn't chugging along for him, I feel like things are going to be really tough. So I like Parekh, but you're going to have to live with what he brings and what he doesn't bring, I think. And I mean, that's obviously true for any player, but with him, like, you don't really have the same kind of thing with Igor Chernyshov, for example, right? Who may not have the raw skill level or the confidence that a guy like, the audacity that a guy like Parekh has, and the mind for creating offense at the same level. But with Chernyshov, you kind of see a pretty well-rounded player that can do a lot decently well. And with Parekh, it's like, I see him in the NHL, but again, like, the offensive style defensemen who really hit it big and stick in the NHL, I find don't really play like him. The guys that have a few hot years and score a ton of points, but fans of them go, yeah, he's great on the power play and he's a great player to have when he's got the puck, but boy, there are moments where you go, oh my goodness, that Jake Gardiner style of player, where it's like, yeah, like, overall you might get a decent output from this guy, but there are costs to that. So to me, it's like weighing all of that a little differently. I still feel the same way as I did about the warts in his game, but I think the strengths I wasn't quite giving as much credit to. And in the game that I did, he played like 28 minutes at 5-on-5 and was pretty solid. I wouldn't say he would, like, again, I don't look at him and go, oh my goodness, this is the next incredible NHL offensive defenseman. But, he will bring stuff to the NHL that should produce offense for a defenseman. Sure, it's there. How far will Demidov fall? I hope he falls all the way to Team Scouching's pick at 20 wherever. I mean, who knows? Toronto might be out pretty early, and they might have a draft pick pretty early in the first round. Who knows if they're actually going to use it, or if they're going to trade it for more toughness that'll help them next year. But who knows? I don't think Demidov is going to fall that far. People make fun of NHL scouts a lot, but a lot of the time they kind of seem to generally do okay. I mean, obviously it depends on the team, but these people aren't dumb. And I get the feeling that if anybody on planet Earth was watching Ivan Demidov down the playoff run and down the stretch of the season, they would look at him and go, there is no freaking way that we're saying no to this guy at 3 or 4 or something like that. Like, if he's not a top 5 pick, I would trade up for him. If he's not a top 5 pick and someone's sitting there at 6 going, I don't know, maybe we take Demidov and just see, but boy, do we really love Zeev Buyum. I'm going, dude, take someone else. I'll take the pick from you and give you someone else. Like, fine, okay, like, let's talk here. Because Demidov is such a special offensive talent that I hope he doesn't fall too far. Is Cole Beaudoin just a worse version of Greentree? No. Cole Beaudoin is like the opposite of Liam Greentree. Just high speed, high physicality, northbound freight train type player. Greentree, if anything, could learn a thing or two from Cole Beaudoin. I just did a game of Greentree today, and he was... and I think it was the 3rd game in a row of him where I'm going... I might have just seen 2 of the best games you played all season earlier in the year, because the last few I've found him to be a lot more sort of in the background. The fact that he's an 05, I think, factors into that a little bit. Or no, he's not an 05, he's an 06. Sorry, but he's barely an 06. But for me with Greentree, I just kind of go, I'm not really seeing the same things I remember seeing at the beginning of the year, and that does sketch me out a little bit. Is Justin Poirier a unicorn? No, I don't think he is this year. I think Justin Poirier is going to score a bunch of goals in Quebec. God only knows where he goes from there, but I don't see an NHL player there. I don't have him ranked anymore. I don't see it. We can get into it if you want, but there's just a lot of problems that a guy his size seems to really struggle to overcome unless he's just shooting the puck in the offensive zone, which to me is always problematic. Where does Zetterberg fall? We kind of went over that. Brad Lambert building momentum with his seasons. I mean, yeah, he played in the NHL and looked really good in that game. He was pretty good. With Yzerman dropping in from his preseason ranking, what is one area he needs to work on to develop into what some said was a potential star? I think the thing with Yzerman, I think Yzerman has the raw finishing ability to play in the NHL, right? If you've got him and he turns into the modern day version of Alex Ovechkin, but a more frustrating version of that, in the sense of like, you see it in this tournament too. Like Cole Yzerman obviously is an extraordinarily gifted shooter. Just does a like that. That's his bread and butter. I think he's a good skater as well. Like he gets up the ice well. But man, he tries to do a lot of things himself, and he has trouble settling pucks when he's passed pucks in transition, and that kind of screws him up. He skates himself right into pressure a lot. I saw him against Norway try to flip the puck around a guy, and he tried to like jump around him and caused a turnover, and I think it came back for an odd man rush the other way. Like just little things where it's like, Cole, there's a clear pass option that would make an offensive zone entry really easy, and he's trying to barrel the puck into the offensive zone himself and shoot from the face-off circles, right? Like it's like that's fine, and you can score on junior goalies by doing that because of how good your shot is. But I feel like NHL defenses are going to have an easier time boxing him out. I feel like NHL goaltenders will pre-scout him pretty easily. Obviously, he'll be a power play threat, 100%. He'll be a power play threat. But I think the thing that separates him from a guy like Cole Caulfield, I think Caulfield brought a lot more pace and patience to his game. Like the skill level was also is really good with Caulfield, and with Yzerman, it's hit or miss. What I will say is that Cole Yzerman, I think, is a better potential playmaker than I think people are leading him out to be. But it's just that he doesn't really get those opportunities very often, right? Like it's a lot of let's get the puck to Cole and see what he can do, And sometimes that results in a goal, sometimes that results in a turnover. But it usually doesn't result in an offensive zone cycle, right? Where he's kind of a major part of that rotation. Which prospect has the best hair? It's a very good question. I'm going down the list and trying to think. Constantinius has a pretty good set of locks coming out the back of his helmet. I don't know. I'm thinking about all these guys, and most of it's pretty similar. Yeah, I don't know. It's a good question, but I'm not sure. Gavin McKenna, what are your thoughts on his game? I mean, McKenna's been amazing for Canada in this tournament. Like, you see, very sort of Johnny Gaudreau style game there with him. Like, super high skill level. Yeah, he's a good scorer himself, but like his ability to change angles and have secondary options and follow-up chances and just finding ways to get the puck around opponents and into scoring areas and all that wonderful stuff is just so good. And he finds creative ways to maintain possession and just brings so many positive traits to the game that if he fills out a little bit over the next 2 seasons and maybe gains a step of quickness from where he is right now, just so that he has a little bit of an easier time fending off pressure from guys in close quarters. He kind of relies on his skill level a lot to do that, which is fine, but I think there needs to be a bit more to be as good as he could be. But he's really, really good. I mean, I know Craig Button has said about 87 times on the broadcast that if there's a better player for the 2026 draft, he hasn't seen them yet. I mean, that's probably true. I would for him, I would say that's probably true. I can't say I've done any better. But I just think that it's way too early to make those kinds of judgments. But Gavin McKenna is looking extremely good. Zeev Buium, pros, cons. Really skilled, really calm, really collected, really smart puck mover, confident when he needs to be in the offensive zone and confident at good times, doesn't take on too much on his own too often. The defensive stuff, like the defensive skating, like on rushes and closing gaps in the defensive end and imposing himself physically are problems that I think, he might end up a little lower on my list than where I have him now. But I mean, there's just other guys where I'm going, yeah, but I'm putting him behind who and why. And that's always where I kind of fall short because of the good things that he brings to his game. But the defensive zone play, especially physically, and when guys sort of drop a shoulder and go wide on him, that's when things kind of get a little tough for him. But his placement, his positioning, his he's fluid, he's calm, he's not chasing things. Like, he does all that pretty well, I guess. Beckett Seneca to the Wings. Can you see first line potential? Seneca's a bit of a wild card for me. I mean, he's in my first round. He's at 28. I like what he does in pockets. Like, he'll do nothing for 2 periods and then look like magic for for the last 20 minutes of the game or the last 10 minutes of a game. Pretty crazy. Really, really like what I've seen of Seneca in pockets, but not as a whole. I mean, if the Red Wings picked him at 14, 15, whatever, I feel like there would be better players on the board now. But I do have time for the argument that you give Seneca some time and he'll get a lot better. I could see that happening. And I think he brings a very there's a good amount of determination in his game. Like the way that he can make plays under pressure and the way he goes into diving into pressure situations. And, he's a confident guy and makes plays often. And that's a good thing, obviously. But with Seneca, I think that it's just like I don't see him as a first liner at all. Again, if I saw a player as a first line player, they'd be ranked top 5, right? Like, a player drafted in the middle of the first round very rarely becomes a first line player. It's just not common. You're looking at like maybe a middle 6 guy, and I feel like Seneca is much more likely to fall into that range. How much have you seen of Nikita Grabyankin? Yeah, I've seen him a lot over the years. He was probably the year he was drafted of re-entries in Russia, he was probably the only one that I thought was interesting. And he's gotten a lot better since then. I mean, he was really lanky at the time, really skilled, and a pretty decent skater, but he really seems to have beefed up a little bit, gained a bit of a physical edge to him and a resilient edge to him that I think is a very interesting player. I don't know if he's going to be an NHL mainstay, but I think he could challenge for that down the road. Just not right away. I feel like Grabyankin with the Marlies will be an interesting thing to see. But I mean, I think there's an NHL player there, maybe, but maybe in sort of a third line style kind of thing. Compare Fantilli and Celebrini. Okay. So Fantilli is definitely, I'd say quicker, and I'd say a lot more fluid on his feet. Obviously the size that Fantilli has is an advantage. Celebrini is a much smarter player, I think, just the way that he times his passes and reads oncoming pressure and moves the puck effectively and all of those things. I think he does that really well. He also just does whatever he can to get to the middle of the ice in the offensive zone. Fantilli kind of didn't really do that so much, which held him back quite a bit, which is ironic because he won the Hobey Baker. But Celebrini, I think, just brings such a rock-solid mind for the game that really helps him out. Fantilli just brings all the talent in the world. The shot, the playmaking, the skating, it's all great with him. It was just a matter of how he saw the ice that I think was different, whereas with Celebrini, it's how he sees the ice, I think, and how he just goes out and makes results happen and makes things happen in a variety of different ways at a very good level. I think that's what makes him stick out. What do you think the Leafs might get or should draft to round out their prospects? Well, the Leafs kind of need like a lot, really, when you think about it. The Marlies aren't very good. They drafted 3 times last summer. 2020, like they're a little bit like part of the reason the Toronto Maple Leafs are in the situation they are in right now is because they haven't drafted particularly well. Like Bobby McMahon came out of nowhere. He wasn't even drafted. And I like some of the guys that they have in the system. I thought Topi Niemelä had a really good season, but I mean, Topi Niemelä is not going to move the needle the way that Toronto needs to move the needle, I don't think. I like Topi Niemelä, though. I like Ronnie Hirvonen, but he doesn't have a ton of upside, I don't think, in the NHL. The Leafs, look, I think I saw someone ask about the Leafs, too. Like, the Leafs need to... It's a very long discussion, but to me, they need to draft players that are just dogs and intense. And I know people say that about Easton Cowan. I get it. I didn't see Easton Cowan as a super, like, I get it, he's competitive. But in terms of on the ice, that ability to follow through on physical play, forecheck hard, play with speed and intent and high skill, I think that that's something that Toronto seems to lack. Like Rodion Amirov would have been an excellent Toronto Maple Leaf. The Leafs desperately need a Rodion Amirov right now. Like, look at what Seth Jarvis is doing for the Carolina Hurricanes right now with how much he's giving them. I liked Amirov more than Jarvis, and getting a shot in the arm like that with a kid that young would be such a benefit. It's so sad what happened to him, not only personally, but for Toronto, right? Like, he was a special player. And so I think that Toronto needs to think a little bit more like that. They spent a lot of time drafting pure skill, didn't really work out for them. They have now gone into this mode of drafting really smart players and hoping their development staff can really take them a ways. And I mean, look at how they play in the playoffs, right? Like, I look at how they play in the playoffs and I'm going, I see Easton Cowan being very similar to these guys in the NHL based on how Easton Cowan plays. Very smart, very tactical, very surgical, but not a high-paced guy, not a very physical guy, not a very resilient guy, but just very smart, very competitive, but there just isn't... It's hard to explain, right, without sounding like a hockey man, but there's like that oomph factor, where it's like you impose yourself on your opponents. And there isn't a whole lot of that if I'm Toronto, right? Like, I look at a Caden Lindstrom as a guy who imposes himself on opponents. A Tija Ginla imposes himself. Michael Brandsegg-Nygård imposes himself. Teddy Stiga imposes himself. You can make it work with guys who don't really impose themselves on opponents, like Zane Parekh or an Adam Jiricek or whatever. You can make that work, but their role is going to be a little bit more limited or a little bit more focused in certain areas. Whereas you got guys like the ones I mentioned, you throw them over the boards, you know what you're going to get. You know you're going to get something that when push comes to shove makes a huge difference. Literally, push comes to shove. Being said, as a Wild fan, do you see a lot of Marco Rossi and Riley Heidt? No, I don't at all. I didn't know Miroslav Shatan was 6'7". Yeah, his kid is 6'7", exactly. J-Milk. Tragic news: Connor Lee displaced as the number 1 British prospect by Brindley Caps. 6'3" and rips a puck, so he's basically Austin Matthews. There you go. The future Austin Matthews of the NHL is Brindley Caps, Great Britain All-Star. Who do you like in the 3rd and 5th round with potential? I mean, I don't know. Take all the names I said in the question for 5th to 7th round and that. Okay. What makes a really good scout? That's a $1 billion question. Have you seen or heard any NHL teams reach out to amateur online scouts? Well, yes. I know the second half to your answer is yes, because it's happened to me and many people I know. What makes someone good? It's tricky because I'm also biased here because you would imagine, think I'm at least decent at this and at least understanding the sport and what to look for. The problem is that the answer to, you put 10 different people in the room who watch a lot of hockey, I think you can look at them and all go, okay, what makes a good hockey player? And I feel like a lot of them would all have different legitimate answers, right? For different reasons. I have a pretty good idea of what I would say and how I would answer it and explain why I feel that way. I think that that is an important thing to know. Like when it comes to when it comes to what are you like when you watch for a hockey player, what are you looking for is one thing, but why that is another, right? Like a lot of people will say, I'm looking for compete. It's like, okay, what do you mean by that? What situations do you mean are you looking for there? When you say compete, do you just mean a big player? When you say compete, do you mean they throw hits? Okay. But what if you say, well, I want guys who score a lot of points? It's like, well, okay, but not every point is made equal. What do you mean? Like, do you like players that, how do they score those points? Like, what are you looking for? I think that number one, what makes a good scout is someone who explains why they think what they think in a way where you can at least look at it and go, I see what this person is talking about because I've seen this player as well, but here's where I might disagree, right? If I'm looking at if I can, I'm biased because I see what I see and I get the data that I want to get, but if I see someone talking about a player and I'm going, not only have I never seen this player do that ever, but they do the opposite. Or if I see someone, this guy has looked really good playing left wing. It's like, well, I've tracked a few games of him so far and watched a lot of video. He's playing center or the opposite. Oh, what about this guy who plays center? He's looked good playing center. He doesn't play that position. So clearly you're missing something, right? Like you're putting your work together through looking at elite prospects profiles and going off of safe assumptions from that. I can't say that that's what people do, but from my perspective, I can see things, and I watch a lot of hockey. Right now, this is my job. I do it all day, every day, like ask my partner. It's pretty much all day long. It probably drives her nuts. She's a saint. But it's a lot of hockey. And so I know a lot about all these guys. I've seen a lot. And my philosophy goes down to, I don't think about this that much. I go, what do they do well? What do they not do well? What are the effects of those pros and cons on the game when they are on the ice? And what could they bring to an NHL team doing what they do now? Assuming that they will be this style of player when they are 25 years old, which most of the time they are, what will their job be and how good at their job could they be? That's all I'm trying to figure out, right? I don't think too much about how they skate. I don't think too much about how they shoot. I don't think too much about what happens when they are on the power play taking faceoffs. I don't think about any of that. I don't think about their body language. I don't think about any of that. I just go, what is happening to them? How do they do stuff? What is happening? Right? Like, what do they do well? What do they not? What could they do? That's it. So to me, I think a good scout also watches as many players as they can in different areas of the world. If it were me, if I were a scouting director, my department would be restructured completely different from a lot of NHL scouting departments. It would be the bulk of the team would be data monkeys like me who just watch hockey from around the world all day long, who have a good eye for the game and go, here's the data that came out of these games that we created ourselves because of what we're looking for. It's tailored to us. And in my opinion, when you do a lot of data work watching players, it forces you to really focus on what's happening and the intent behind what they're doing and the results of what they're trying. The bulk of the staff would be doing that centrally located, right? Like build an office where they can share stuff with each other easily, bounce ideas off of each other, constantly be updating your ranking list and blah, blah, blah. And then you have some guys, well, I shouldn't say guys, you have some people out in the world who travel like any other scout would, but their job is to do intel, interview the kid, interview the parents, interview the coaches, go hang around, look, like, get a basis of the vibe. They're vibe scouts, right? Because I do think there is a lot of psychology behind prospect development. There's a lot of psychology behind athletic development. Like, the fit of a player with a team matters so much. Look at all the goalies who bounce around and then all of a sudden, bam, they pop. What about all the guys who have been offshoots from a team? They go somewhere else and they hit it big, right? Eli Tolvanen could not find a job in Nashville for years. You could look at the numbers and go, even as a bottom six guy, he's not that bad. Then he goes to Seattle. He's a bottom six guy there, middle six guy, and he's decent, right? Like, it's if you can find, you know, it happens. And I think a lot of that comes down to fit and psychology. Like, everybody's different. They have different preferences, and you have to sort of play ball with that and know what you're getting into. So to me, like, you've opened a can of worms here, but like, that's kind of where I sort of come down on it. And if you have an understanding of, if you have an understanding of a lot of players in a lot of different areas of the world, you avoid a problem that I think really plagues people in hockey, which is, well, I'm the Western Hockey League scout, and here are the 10 guys that I really like, and I'm going to pound the table for the guy that I have at 5 on my board. But then everybody else is going, well, okay, I've seen that guy a little bit, maybe here and there, but like, I don't have any knowledge the only knowledge I have to combat that is my knowledge of my area. It's like, well, what about this guy that I really like, right? From Sweden, for example. It's like, well, but you don't have anything connecting the two. It's I like this guy from my region. I think my guy from this region is better than your guy from this region. Whereas if you have just a bunch of people who are going, let's take a bird's eye look at everybody all the time and go, then we can sort of gain an understanding of not only who these players are, but how these leagues work and the subtle differences in styles of play between, you know, Finland and Sweden and Russia and Canada and even Canada versus the US, right? Like, you can sort of get a gauge on what's going on and where and what works where and what doesn't work elsewhere. That's kind of where I come down on it. And so to me, someone who has a really good bird's eye view really sort of pays attention to the pros and cons, not only identifies the pros and cons of a player well, but weighs the importance of those. I think weighing the importance of those and understanding what their potential fit could be and why, right? Like, if you just say that this guy, you know, plays like a third line center in the NHL, it's like, well, okay, but why? What is it that he's going to do, right? And that's always kind of where I work backwards from. Why is Catton not considered a surefire top 3 or 4 player? Seems like he has everything to be an elite forward. Smarts are there, the skills there, the passing ability is there. I think people look at him and go, he's a little small. You know, I think he deals with pressure really well, but I can see why people would go, yeah, but when you've got Nick Cousins barreling in on him at 40 kilometers an hour, how is he going to handle that? I think there's an argument there where it's like he might have a bit of problems. I personally am not worried about it. I think the defensive game is a little bit lackluster. He's not a very physically imposing player. He doesn't get super, he doesn't get his hands dirty a ton. But for me, it's more about, he times things well. He puts himself in good position and times things pretty well, generally. So yeah, to me, he's a top guy. But, to me, Zach Benson was a top guy last year. And he went in the mid-teens, early-ish. No, 16, 15? Doesn't matter. Later than he should have gone. And I don't think Buffalo really cares. Who do you see the Sharks picking with Pittsburgh's pick? Again, same thing I say to all the whatever. There's a lot of players that are going to be available there that are going to be good. Guys that I probably have ranked really high. Like, I don't know. Look, for me, I don't think the San Jose Sharks pick this guy, but Alphonse Frey is a guy who I love, and a mid-first round pick to me doesn't seem that crazy. If I'm San Jose, I wonder if I just take the swing on an Adam Jiricek, who I think fits in with kind of what Mike Grier is maybe looking for. Really high-end skater, really high-end defensive abilities and high-end defensive vision and timing and everything. And if you can get him to be a better player on the puck, see the ice a little bit better, I think you're going to be rewarded. Yegor Surin's potential, I don't know. I think he's a pretty mixed bag. Maybe a third line energetic guy with a shot. You could put him on a second power play unit, maybe, I guess, but I think Surin is a bit of a ways away. Cole Beaudoin's big, fast, strong, two-way forward. Does he have one of the highest floors in the draft? I mean, I think Beaudoin probably is an NHL player in some way, just because of how he can play physically and how quick he can be in a straight line. Do I think there's a tremendous amount? Do I think he's a tremendous amount of a hockey player in the NHL? I don't really think so. But, a good sort of down the lineup dude to have that can go over the boards and give you a good shift and all that stuff and crash and bang like you need him to, then yeah, I could see it. Brian Stewart here. Ovchinnikov's struggling to get minutes because he hasn't been good, doesn't use his speed as a weapon. That's the thing, right? Like, I would have left him in Russia to have him learn that every shift you need to use what you've got, which for him, yeah, he had a lot of speed and skill, but in the KHL, I remember looking at him and I'm going, it's not coming out very often anymore. Like, I don't really get it. But yeah, that's been a problem. 2021 top 5 redraft. That's a good one. I'll open that up. So, I mean, for me, I still have Beniers at 1. Got to switch. Yeah, like, I definitely would put McTavish higher than I had him. Probably would bump down Eklund. I top 5, some combination of Beniers, Hughes, McTavish, friggin' Stankoven maybe. He's awesome. I love Logan Stankoven. He's been great in the NHL. And Owen Power, something like that, maybe. So the 4 guys that went top 4 and Logan Stankoven, I think, is fair. Yeah, I'm good with that for now. Should a prospect being called NHL ready be held for prospects who can make a significant impact on their team being able to only play in the NHL without really impacting the NHL? Well, this is why I don't really like labels like that. I think like in the Michael Brandt Newgard report, I say that he looks the most like an NHL player now of a lot of the guys in this draft. And I think that that's because, again, like, Look at how the playoffs work in the NHL, right? Like, I think, again, you could say, oh, it's a different sport in the playoffs. I think the playoffs this year are pretty much hockey. They are playing hockey. The referees, I think, are, in general, calling it like it is a lot of the time. They're doing a good job relative to what has happened in previous years, I think. If anything, they've been overprotective of players in some situations, right? Which, I don't mind. I'd rather that than the other. So to me, but when you watch the NHL, it's like, okay, players are going to the net. Like, look at Toronto. The guys that have all of the skill and all of the offense and everything you could want. As a scout, you watch kids when they're kids and you go, look at Connor McDavid go. High speed, high skill. He's so good at hockey, right? And I mean, Connor McDavid is Connor McDavid. He's a little bit different. But when you get to the playoffs and when push comes to shove in the NHL, sometimes you just need those guys who can grind their way through pressure, whether it's with speed or resilience or both, and can just get into the house. They just get a ticket to the dance. You go to the net. You keep it simple. You crash and bang in front of the net. So to me, when you see a guy where it's like, yeah, this guy looks like an NHL player right now, generally that's reserved for players that already have the sort of physical tools necessary. And so with a guy like Brandt Newgard, it's like, well, yeah, you put him in I wouldn't put him in the NHL right away, but if he came to an NHL camp, I'm going, I could put you on a line with NHL players and see what you could do. I'm comfortable doing that. You're fast enough. You can forecheck hard enough. You go to the net. You play it simple. It's not super flashy, but it gets the job done at the level you're at. So let's try it. Let's see how it goes. And so for that, I mean, I think that that's the important thing to sort of keep in mind is like, you know, I look at a Berkeley Catton and I go, as he is now, I mean, in the playoffs, I don't think he's going to bring much to the table, which makes sense because he's young. But I look at a Brant's like Newgard and I go, but him in a playoff, especially with a little bit more weight on him, could be really something. And that won't take that long to get there. But yeah, it's semantics really, and semantics are difficult to discuss. If Lindstrom hits his potential, what current power forward do you see him resembling the most? Like Alex Tuck comes to mind, a guy like that. Trying to think of other ones. Yeah, I mean, Alex Tuck comes to mind immediately, but I'm sure there are others. If you need to vent about the toughness the Leafs invested in these playoffs, go ahead. No, I don't think so. We'll let AJ do that. I mean, we can talk about the Leafs if you want, but look, if you want to talk about the Leafs, there's plenty of discussion going on the internet everywhere. Everybody, again, as is tradition, everybody's losing their friggin' minds and going crazy and getting wild and getting out of control. So if you want that, you can go there. How's the variation between the skills or quality of the top 15 compared to other drafts? So it gets very even very quickly. It gets very questionable very quickly, but it doesn't get disinteresting for me until like the 50th name on my list or so. Oh, AJ's here. Hello. My producer is here. So Consta Hellenius is releasing public today. Andrew Basha is coming out today for subscribers only. So stay tuned for that. Which player in the draft would benefit the most from improving their skating? Probably Liam Greentree. Either Liam Greentree or Michael Hage. I think those two guys. You've probably heard this question a million times. How does Adam Jiricek compare to David? I think David is a little less mobile, but a lot more physical and more skilled and more puck up the ice oriented, whereas Adam is a lot more mobile, laterally especially. His gap control defensively is a lot better. He's a more surgical and precise defender, whereas David is more of a brute force type guy. Jiricek just has problems with his ability to move the puck through his passing. Jiricek got the puck up the ice. Usually it was, to nobody in particular, but it got into the offensive zone a lot. And he also had a lot more confidence and skill walking up from the offensive blue line. Adam just kind of doesn't really bring that. He's a much more safe defensive player, I would say. Porter Martone thoughts. Porter's my new god. I love Porter Martone. The exact type of player that I always love. Again, people think that I don't like big players. Porter Martone is a big player with a lot of skill who can play. He's a competitor. He's a bit of a pain in the ass too, which I love. You want guys who can compete, so get guys that compete. And he definitely does that for sure. And I love him. He's one of my top guys for next year. The problem with the Leafs is the core players, not the peripheral. The problem with the Toronto Maple Leafs is everything. Oh God. It's top to bottom. Just, yeah, I don't know. I've lived here my whole life. I've seen a lot. There's a lot going on there. Any thoughts on what Stein Solberg can become? You want to talk about a kid that I love for being a competitor. Stein Solberg's right there. He's in my first round. I think middle pair defensive defenseman is reasonable. He's a monster. He's a monster and a jerk and a big jerk face and a jerky McJerk, and I love it. Apparently a really easygoing dude, really funny guy, laid back, relaxed, but understands that when he's out there on the ice, he's competing and he's trying to kill people. He's trying to make an impact, literally. And he does. He certainly does. And so giving him a couple years in Sweden, I think from here to sort of learn the ropes there, take a step up in competition and go from there, I think would be really smart. And I really like Stein Solberg. Really Just a guy who took a little while for me to really like, but now I'm really thinking a little bit different about him and going, okay, if we're thinking NHL and looking at the NHL playoffs, like he kind of reminds me of like a Radko Gudas type player, where it's like, yeah, he might not ever score 40, 50 points in a year. He won't play on your power play probably. I mean, Solberg has a pretty decent shot, but I wouldn't say that his like vision and playmaking is power play worthy. But, you know, he's going to be a guy who's going to be a nightmare for opponents, a real pain. And he's going to be a guy who gets pretty decent results. Like Radko Gudas gets pretty decent results, or at least he did for a really long time in his career. Even though he didn't jump off the score sheet at you. Where would you put Sandin Pellikka in this year's draft? That's a very good question. Probably as high as 7, 6-ish in there. I like it. He'd be pretty good in this year's class, I think. What do you think of Connolly not playing in the USHL in the playoffs so he can play with Team USA? I think his draft stock takes a hit? No. Every scout and general manager is at that tournament. If anything, it would be dumb for him not to go if he was offered a spot. You know, like if anything, it harms you not being at this tournament. Recency bias is a thing. It's a real thing. And people who go to this tournament will look at these guys who are here and go, boy, maybe I do like this guy more than Berkeley Catton. Maybe I do like this guy more than blah, 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 you know? And Trevor Connolly, I think, needs to create every advantage for himself as he can, and this is a big stage for him. It makes a ton of sense to be there, Mr. Phony Terrari. Any Wyatt Johnstons in this draft? Well, I hope not, because that would mean another pandemic shuts down the world and guys who don't play are there. Actually, how actually effective will Celebrini be in the NHL? He has the size. Should he be in the NHL next season? I mean, I think he'll be in the NHL next year with low expectations. I think he will be a very effective player, just maybe not a guy who is constantly like in highlight reels. Like very good player, very well-rounded player who will have highlight reel moments, but you know, like Connor McDavid, Austin Matthews, he is not. But he does bring a lot to the table that's really, really impressive. Have you watched Colin Ralph? Why do people have him ranked? I don't know. I've seen a bit of him and I don't know. He's a decent skater and gigantic, but I don't know. AJ Spellacy, don't think I've really paid too much attention to him. I've seen him a bit early in the year and didn't really feel like I needed to follow up, but I'll check him out again. Have you watched Kevin He? If so, do you have him ranked, and what are your overall thoughts on him? I did at one point. I actually have a game of him that I've been procrastinating doing, so I'll have to get to that eventually. But my thoughts on him, like really good shooter, pretty good edges to make space for himself, but that's about what I've seen. There's not a tremendously diverse player there, I don't think. You know, there's a bit of creativity in terms of getting pucks around players and trying to push through pressure and everything, but very much sort of a grip it and rip it guy, and those always spook me a bit. Yes, and it's true. Michael Hage did not get an invite to the under-18s. Great. We did get... I got a really good question privately from someone who will not be named unless they decide to out themselves in the chat, because I think they're in here. What's the best and worst advice you've been given from scouts and employees? And then I will call it a day because my voice is starting to get tired and we've been going for 2 hours. So the best and worst advice I've been given from scouts and employees. Okay, so I would say the best advice I've gotten... I am a person who deals a lot with imposter syndrome, like a lot. And I don't mean that in the like, I have imposter syndrome thing. Like, no, imposter syndrome is legit. For me, it's a real thing. I am like, there are so many people in this industry who played the game forever, played at a really high level, and just waltzed their way into a job, right? And I'm not saying they don't deserve those opportunities at all, right? But it is infinitely more difficult to be an outsider. I did not come from a hockey family. I played hockey growing up, but I wasn't very good at it. And in my opinion, being not so good at a thing doesn't mean you can't be involved with making that thing better for others in some way. So to me, it's like I know that what I'm doing or trying to do is not insane. You know, other people have done it before. But what I do realize is that what I am doing personally is very different. It is very different from how people do it now. And in that situation, like I see YouTube comments all the time of people on my ranking videos going, this makes no sense. How could you possibly have guys ranked this way? Number one, go look at how NHL drafts break down in reality after the fact. NHL draft lists look absolutely nothing like public lists. That's number one. You think you know how the draft is going to go, and you have no idea. You have no clue, right? No idea. Sometimes within the last few days before the draft, there are details that leak out that, you know, things happen, but you will never in a million years accurately predict what NHL teams are going to do in the draft because they do not see things the same way between each other. They do not see things the same way as the public. They have insights into things that we don't have insight into publicly, right? But for me, the imposter syndrome comes from the general public because, you know, it is true, right? Like maybe I am missing something. I don't spend a whole lot of time at the rink. I have asked numerous people to detail what it is that I might be missing. And again, this is me talking, but I don't find those explanations particularly satisfactory in the context of, well, that means that instead of what I do, it's better for me to get in the car every weekend and drive for 4 hours to go to a rink and back to see a game in real time and jot notes in a notepad. That seems incredibly inefficient if you get the benefits of, oh yeah, you can see their body language when they're on the ice. You see how they treat their teammates on the bench. You see how hard they skate to the bench for a line change. You see all these things that you don't get on a TV camera. I get that there is a different vibe to a game. You get the feel for the speed of a game a little bit better when you're in person. I think the downfall of video is that different camera angles can trick you a lot in terms of how fast things are going, in terms of who's really sticking out and why. That can trick you. You have to have a lot of experience watching different angles and seeing different things and having a catalog of experiences with players, I think. But through all of this stuff where it's like, maybe I'm missing something, maybe I'm wrong, maybe I'm losing my mind and whatever, right? The number one thing I've been told by someone in the NHL is that a lot of criticism or a lot of skepticism, and I see it a lot, especially at the junior level with people who work in junior teams. There is a lot, it's a more vociferous get off my lawn attitude. But generally when that happens, it's a fear response. They see you as something different and they go, well, I don't want that person to take my opportunities from me. I am comfortable doing things the way I do them, and I would rather that person go away forever than do what they're doing differently from how I do it, because God forbid they're better at it than me. Like, I'm not saying that's everybody, but that is definitely a thing, right? Like there are people out there in junior hockey who, when people have opinions that they disagree with, they just go and block them because they're like, you don't go to the rinks, you're a moron, you don't know what you're doing, blah, blah, blah. Meanwhile, they manage a team that's like bottom 5 in the OHL for the last 10 straight years, right? Like, it's like, look a little internally, right? Like I have had teams, we've offered services to teams and they go, thanks, but no thanks. And they're in the bottom of the standings and they poo-poo all over the use of data to analyze a team, right? Like people would rather recruit or sign players that are buddies with an agent or the kid of someone who works with someone, right? Hey, you want to go over to Europe and play for a year? Here's a contract because your agent is the same as this other guy. It's like, you don't want to make that process a little better? Like you don't want that? Like, okay, cool, but go nuts, right? Like that kind of thing. And so there's a lot of that kind of response of, I don't want things to change. And so for me, and again, I'm a person who's in therapy, right? Like this is what I do, right? And a lot of what happens in those discussions privately, it is a lot of like trying to come to terms with how to navigate that type of environment. because I really don't know how to do it properly. And it's really hard to stay mentally positive in that environment when you want to break into that world. So it kind of ostracizes you by voluntarily ostracizing yourself. But it does that because, in my view, and it makes a lot of sense, there's a lot of fear. And so what I have been told is you have to be patient. Things will shake out the way they shake out. If this is something that you truly know what you're doing and you're good at it, things will happen eventually. Your opinions will, you'll see players develop, and I've seen it. Guys that I'm not really high on, not really working out so well. It's more often than not from what I've experienced. And so for me, it's like the advice of keep at it, and you're doing good work. It's just the people who say you're not are afraid a little bit is a big help. And honestly, like, coming to terms with the fact that should motivate me to continue rather than be afraid of that is a big mental hurdle to get over. Like, when situations like that come up, why shouldn't you be upset? Why shouldn't you get mad and motivated, right? Like, why should you kowtow to people who are inefficient and go, you know what? Maybe they're right. I'll just leave them to do whatever it is that they do, file their 2-paragraph or 2-sentence scouting reports on guys, talking about how big they are and how proud they looked on the bench. Like, sure, I'll let them just do that, and I'm going to go be an accountant. No offense to accountants, right? So there's that. The worst advice, I mean, man, I don't think I've gotten a ton of bad advice. Honestly, I think the bad advice I've gotten is that people say that, like, not a lot, but some people have critiqued me, basically, and privately, I should say, saying that, like, you need to consider the type of person you're dealing with. Like, when you're talking about junior hockey kids and all that stuff, you need to know the type of person you're getting and if that person is someone you want in your organization. But my retort to that is, you're dealing with 17-year-old boys, right? Like, if we want to live in a world where we take 17-year-old boys and immediately put them in the limelight of professional sports, it's like, hey, welcome to being an adult. Here are millions of people who are riding on your every action and every game to make sure that you make their team better. It's like, that's not going to work for everybody. And I think you have to be very prepared and cognizant of going, okay, not every kid is going to be in the same situation for these types of things, and we need to be prepared on how to manage that, right? Like, I remember being 17. Between being 17 and 24, I was a wildly different person. And I think that there needs to be a little bit more faith in the ability of, if you want to say that these experienced hockey people have the credentials to run a team, and that also includes junior level and junior age players who are very young and getting older and still physically and mentally developing, your job partially too is to guide them along in that process. Like, you're spending millions of dollars developing them on the ice, so why not give them the room and the rope and the faith to develop their themselves as people? Like, to me, you draft a kid, regardless of what's happened before, it's a clean slate. You go, okay, your life is different now, and we're going to help you out, but what happens from here is up to you, right? Here's what we've heard. Here's what we've seen you do. Here's the stuff, blah, blah, blah. We're willing to set all of that aside, but the expectation is that, we go in this direction. And I think that's reasonable. But it seems like people will look at these teenagers and go, like, great player, but man, you just wonder about how they will be in the room. It's like, how can you possibly psychologically project a 17-year-old kid to being in their 20s? Especially when you are in a position where you have a tremendous amount of power and influence and leverage over their future. You can sort of help them out. So that's the other thing, is like, and that's not necessarily, I'm only saying this because it's not necessarily like any bad advice I've gotten from people. but it is something where people critique the way that I do things. And I'm going, okay, but you don't see a whole lot of people. You do see in the draft, you see players who take 5 or 6 years to develop, and maybe they just aren't great players at 17, but they become them. And they also are the types of people who are ready to put in the effort and the time to be pro athletes when they're 25. Sure. Those are the types of guys that find their way into the NHL long term, of course. But more often than not, the good players at draft time are the good players in the NHL, regardless of good or bad people. And not every NHL player is a good person. That's just functionally impossible. So I feel like people who get really wrapped up in these off-ice things with teenage boys can really sort of blind themselves to sort of what the focus should be, and how, like, we always opine for the days of an employer taking care of their employees, right? Like, in the really olden days, before the 9-to-5 workday, the employer fed their employees breakfast and lunch at the job. Like, that happened on farms and stuff. That was the employer's job. So it's like your job is to sort of help your employees along and help them become the best versions of themselves. It's just we've kind of lost that in a lot of things, and we sort of just expect people to show up and be great. And sometimes they're not, right? And that's coming from someone who, isn't always the best first impression person, isn't always the most comfortable person around people. Trust me. So it's like, it would be nice to have guidance. It would be nice to have resources and assistance and all of that stuff, and not be written off because of how I behave on the bench, or because maybe I am dealing with some sort of mental stress or something that needs to be worked on and dealt with. There's lots of things going on there, and I think it's changing, but that's kind of where I get a little bit skittish about that kind of thing. Anyway, we've run over time, so of course, this has been a lot of fun. Again, we're going to be back to normal on Thursday. AJ and I will be back doing the show Thursday afternoon at 2 p.m. where we will do all the playoff recaps, all that stuff. We'll probably yell and scream and gnash our teeth about the Toronto Maple Leafs when they win tomorrow night, and go back to Toronto, and then they'll win Game 6, and then they'll go back to Boston and poop their pants probably. Because that's just how it goes. That's also thrown out so that AJ has a conniption after this stream is over when he sees this and messages me. But anyway, before we go, we're brought to you by Fanatics, so you can click the link in the description or scan the QR code right next to my face right there, and you'll give us a kickback on anything you buy in the store. We're also brought to you by Puck Preps Hockey, where we're doing U18 coverage, which has been a lot of fun for me to do. I actually should probably get back on that horse after this stream, because I'm behind on a couple of games. But NCAA prospect needs, CHL prospect needs, everything you could want under the sun, go over there and check it out. We're updating our ranking lists for the end of the month of April, so check out that stuff when it changes in May. We're also brought to you by Fractal Hockey Consulting, which is my business for hand-track targeted player analysis and recruitment packages for the NCAA Europe and beyond. Again, we partnered with the Golden Bucket Tournament, so if you or you know anyone or coach anyone who is a U Sports Division I, Division III player in the U.S., and you're looking for opportunities to play overseas, or they're looking for opportunities to play overseas, go check out Golden Bucket. Tell them that we sent you, and it'll be a good opportunity for you. They just announced another team from France is coming. They've got teams from all over Europe on the way to Montreal in a month, and I'll be there, so that'll be fun. And we're brought to you by Scouching.ca, where you can get tons of data tools with unparalleled insights into the draft, the prospects, and players making their way into the NHL. You'll get access to spreadsheets like this one and this one, data tables and, not data tables, but data visualization tools and all kinds of stuff with the track data that I get on players that generally is locked behind Fractal Hockey. But now there are things that I can sort of pick and choose and make public a little bit, just to give you a little teasy tease. But in any case, thank you very much for joining me. This was a lot of fun, and we'll see you later. I got to go to Costco and write some game reports for Puck Preps so that I can pay my bills. But anyway, thank you very much for joining me. We'll see you on Thursday afternoon, where we will have a more put together show with producer AJ back, and we'll be back on the NHL wagon. And good luck to your favorite hockey teams if they're in the playoffs. And good luck to your favorite hockey teams if they are in the draft lottery, even though we'll be doing shows before the draft lottery. Anyway, thank you very much, and we'll see you around, and have a lovely couple of days. See you Thursday.